Good evening, darlings and deviants. My name is Lucy, and I'm just a little loony. That's right, I'm still on my Fallout nonsense. What can I say? It's one of my favorite franchises of all time, and I'm still waiting on that Omen path to Thunder Junction to open up. So I'm going to talk about one of the backup commanders from the Precons. And honestly, I think the Master is a really cool command. No, not that one. No, not that one either. No, not that one. Well, the one I'm talking about is... there we go. The Master Transcendent is super strong and really interesting to me. Let's take a quick look on how we can build a super cool deck around him. Without further ado, let's start the show. So, who is the Master and why is he so transcendent? Well, he's a green, a blue, and a black for a 2/4 legendary artifact creature mutant who, when he enters the battlefield, gives someone 2 rad counters. While you can build around this, it's small peanuts compared to what we have planned. His second ability lets you tap him to put target creature card in a graveyard that was milled this turn onto the battlefield under your control. It's a green mutant with base power and toughness 3/3, period. There's nothing extra about it. It loses its other colors and creature types, but it keeps any abilities it might have had. While there's plenty of decks I want to build from this set, I overlooked the Master at first, probably because the radiation mechanic isn't a super consistent way to mill people. Sure, he's good in the 99 of the Mothman deck, but it seemed a bit too random to lead the charge if we're worried about putting rad counters on ourselves and on our opponents. But then I had the thought, you don't need to build it around radiation. You can just play the good mill cards. And so this video was born because this idea has been living rent-free in my head since then. So let's take a look at some of the options of building this deck. Oh, but first I wanted to announce this here. I put it on my community tab and have been putting it in my descriptions, but you know, people don't really read those for more than 4 seconds. I sure as heck don't. So just so everyone knows, I have opened a P.O. box in your realm. That stands for post office on your end and portal oscillator on mine. In case you didn't know that, the address should be up on the screen, probably here? Probably here. Here, yeah. You don't need to send me anything, but if you do, there it is. Check it out if you want. So I mentioned good mill cards. Let me go over what those are. We're not going to try to actively mill people out, so we're looking for effects that mill a decent amount of cards, but have other utility, because we do still want to kill our opponents with combat damage at the end of the day. Though there is a use for the big splashy mill effects, I'll get into those a bit later. Stay tuned. First off, we have Dreamborn Muse. For 2 and 2 blue, you get a 2/2 spirit with, at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player mills X cards, where X is the number of cards in their hand. Something really important to remember about the Master is that he doesn't need to activate as a sorcery, meaning if the Muse mills something amazing, we can slam dunk it onto our battlefield at any time during that player's turn. Next up is Ashiok Sculptor of Fears. Yeah, it's an intro deck planeswalker, but it's kinda neat. For 4, a blue, and a black, you get a 4 loyalty Ashiok planeswalker that has 3 abilities. +2 draws a card and makes everyone mill 2, perfect for what we're trying to do here. There, -5 puts a creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield. That's right, any graveyard, and their -11 gains control of all of an opponent's creatures. The first 2 abilities synergize really well with what we're trying to do here, so this card is an amazing include in this deck. Finally, we have a relatively new addition in the form of Sorceress Squall. For 6 and 3 blue, you get a sorcery that makes an opponent mill 9 cards. Then you can cast an instant sorcery from that player's graveyard for free, and you get to exile it. This card would be kind of terrible. 9 mana for this kind of effect is not really what you want to be doing with your life, except it has Delve, which means we can use the cards from our graveyard to pay for the generic mana cost. And considering we have so many ways to fill up our own graveyard, this is an easy pickup that lets us double dip into the thievery. So the Master has a super powerful tap ability. It'd be a shame to use it only once, so let's cheat legally again. By the way, this is where those big mill effects that I was talking about earlier come into play. You know, if you play something like a Traumatize and you mill like half of an opponent's graveyard, you'll want to be able to tap the Master multiple times in a turn, so that you can get multiple mutants from the graveyard and build up your army. First up is Kiora's Follower. For a green and a blue, you get a 2/2 merfolk that lets you untap a permanent. This may look like a normal mana dork, but not only can it untap mana rocks and things that tap for more than 1 mana, but it can also untap the Master to snipe more milled cards out of your opponent's graveyards. Next is Magerite Stone, Patriarch Seal, and 1000-Year Elixir. They all sorta kinda do the same thing. Pay 1 and tap to untap the Master, or any other creature you might have. They all have their different advantages though. The stone is cheaper, but it can only hit creatures with tapped activated abilities, but the seal makes mana, and the elixir gives the Master pseudo haste. These are all easy includes in a deck like this. Freed from the Real may be the second most powerful version of this effect for our deck. For 2 and a blue, you get an enchantment aura that lets you pay a blue to either tap or untap the enchanted creature. Spoiler, we're probably going to be untapping the creature more than we're tapping it, especially if we're enchanting our own creature. So we've milled our opponents for a bunch of cards, but maybe they've killed the Master one too many times. There's no reason to leave all those cool creatures lying around in the graveyards. Let's get our shovels and get to digging. I'm not going to be bringing up the obvious ones, you know, because everybody knows about your Dread Returns, your Reanimates, your Anime Dads, blah 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 blah. Let's look at the cool ones. First up is Endless Obedience. For 4 and 2 black, you get to bring a creature back from any graveyard back to life under your control. That's not that good. 6 mana to do this is bad. But oh look, it's got Convoke, which means for every creature we have lying around, this spell gets discounted. For every mana you can chip off of that cost, the better this card gets. Next is Dino DNA. Not gonna lie, I didn't know this card did what it did. I assumed it was a card for dinosaurs. For 1 mana, you get an artifact with Imprint. You can pay 1 and tap the DNA in order to exile a creature. Then you can pay 6 and make a token of a creature that's been exiled with the Dino DNA. And the creature stays in exile, so you can keep using this ability. The biggest restriction is that this card can only really be used at sorcery speed, but when you're exiling something like a Critterhoof Behemoth or an Udvara Hellkite, I don't think that matters too much. Finally, we have Stitch Together. For 2 black, we get a sorcery that returns a creature card from our graveyard to our hand. That's bad. That's really, really bad. That's not a good rate at all. But if we have Threshold, we can just plop that sucker onto the battlefield. This card's great because ideally we'll be milling ourselves along with our opponents, and we don't want to risk one of our creatures getting stuck in the graveyard where we can't use it. So normally I'd end things off here, but I have a kinda neat combo for you guys. A very notable thing about the Master is that he can grab creatures from every card milled this turn. So what if we, I don't know, had something that untapped him when a creature comes into play, and something that milled pretty easily? This is going to be a bit of a complex combo. Yeah, kinda, but hey, these cards are individually pretty good, so might as well just assemble Exodia sometimes, right? So step 1, we need Intruder Alarm. This is an enchantment for 2 and a blue that makes it so that creatures don't untap during everyone's untap step, which seems kinda bad with a commander with a tap ability, but bear with me. The alarm also untaps all creatures when another creature enters the battlefield. So with this, we're going to be tapping and untapping over and over as long as we can keep milling our opponents. So we need a way to keep people milling. There's 2 options here realistically. Option 1 is one of those big milling effects that I talked about earlier. Those big milling effects like Traumatize, for example, are a bit less consistent because you only target 1 person, they might not be playing a lot of creatures, you know, but it's only 1 card and we can keep tapping and untapping over and over again, getting a pretty sizable army. Option 2 is much more powerful and may constitute a war crime. Also depends on which play group you're in because it really depends on how many creature decks you're playing. Mind Crank is 2 mana for an artifact that makes your opponents mill cards for every life they lose, which is, you know, fine, but sometimes we're not going to be able to just attack in and mill opponents that way. For that, we have Sir Conrad the Grim. This means whenever a creature dies, is put to a graveyard from anywhere, or leaves the graveyard, then everyone loses a life. Do you see where I'm going with this? You mill people with Mind Crank. If creatures are put in there, they lose life, so that they mill more cards. Does something die? They lose more life, and they mill more cards. And if you have Intruder Alarm, all those creatures are yours, which cause more life loss because they're leaving the graveyard, which makes them mill more cards. Is it a deterministic combo? Not really. It could whiff pretty quickly depending on what your playgroup is doing and what decks are at the table. But if you end up with a massive amount of mutants that belong to your opponents with a variety of cool abilities, I mean, hey, that's just super. Overall, the Master seems really cool. While the rad counter theme the original precon comes with is kinda neat and really synergizes with the Master well, there's still plenty of cool options that you can include in the deck to make an army of super mutants to take over the wasteland. I can't wait to get a hold of these cards, and I'm super excited to see what other cool brews all of you out there can come up with. If you like what you saw here, take a look at another one of my videos here. Oh, and subscribe. I'm really close to 500 subs, and if you could help me get there, that would be fantastic. As always, thank you all so very much for watching, and until next time, au revoir!